My talk is inspired by a couple quotes. Robert Rauschenberg, you can't bring culture to people, you can only bring it out of them. And by Crystal South's statement, identify yourself, you can take the art of the internet, but can you take the internet out of art? IDK, I don't know, or LOL, laughing out loud. My talk is called Bringing to and Bringing Out Art, Culture, and Social Media. That gives it a sense of being a final product, but it's not. This is a work in progress. It's a really exciting topic. And when I started thinking about this, and this is going to be like a 15-minute Pechakucha. When I started thinking about this, I started thinking about the relationship between eyes, ears, words, and objects. Adorno's statement, it is self-evident that nothing concerning art is self-evident anymore, not even its right to exist. Paralleling in some ways John Baldessari's What is Painting, ironically, critically using text to say the statement, art is a creation for the eye and can only be hinted at with words. Or Jasper Johns, The Critic Sees, an ironic criticism of the art critic who sees not with his eyes but with what he hears other people saying about the art. So if the critic sees in 1961, in 2014 the critic yelps. Yelp as a forum for art criticism. And not just everyone writing art criticism. Well, yeah, in fact, everyone, including professional art critics like Brian Dretkour, who uses Yelp as a forum for his own critical work. So where do art and culture reside? I think it lies in a network, and in fact, that's where I went to find out. So I asked 1,907 of my closest Facebook friends to help me out. I created the Whitney Shared Spaces guest list sweepstakes, and if you made a provocative comment in response to the Whitney provocations, provocative in terms of getting 3+ likes, you would be on my guest list. There were 35 comments, and only 2 of them received 3 likes or more. Now that might say more about my Facebook community than anything else. But I just wanted to sort of turn this in on itself and share with you some of the comments I thought were particularly interesting. So actually, for a while, I thought the comments were really boring. So I seeded it myself by saying what irks me about the questions is that they don't address art that incorporates social media as an integral component of the work. And a respondent said, right on, man, I'd like to take it a step further. I think the Whitney cues bump up against a kind of fallacious thinking that social media has brought a metaphysical change to art and commerce, rather than a cultural change. Play Damage, Kurt Kloninger, said, art that is solely about blurring the line between actual gallery space and virtual network space will forever be renegotiating 2 modernist myths. 1, that a white cube gallery could be transcendental. 2, that the inside of a computer could be transcendental. But such art will never actually be doing much more than undermining, foregrounding, reconfiguring, dallying with, relying upon, perpetuating these 2 myths. And I agreed. And I said one aspect of some of the work that he and I were talking about that's interesting is that it does much more than simply interrogate the relationship between virtual and actual, and has no pretense of transcendence. In fact, it often relies on deterioration. It's impermanent. Play Damage responded, and I think this was really insightful, such work performs an implicit institutional critique. Not because it's anti-institutional, but because it inherently exceeds the institution's ability to contextualize it. It out-metasizes the institution. And he thought that this approach was much more fruitful and entangled in terms of its problematizing of some of these issues. So, a little history of art before social media, if there was such a thing. So one of my favorite examples is Roy Ascott's La Plissure du Texte. 1983, this was a planetary fairy tale in which remote participants from 13 nodes around the world used a computer network to create a collaborative planetary fairy tale through a process called distributed authorship. Ascott wrote that in telematic art, meaning is not created by the artist, distributed through the network and received by the observer. Meaning is the product of interaction between the observer and the system, the content of which is in a state of flux, of endless change and transformation. Now, what's important here, I think, is that in 1983, we didn't have social media. We didn't have participatory culture. But we had the seeds of it in experimental artistic practices. And I think that if we look at what's happening in contemporary art today, we will see the seeds of the future. As Jack Burnham memorably wrote, art is a psychic dress rehearsal for the future, mirroring McLuhan's comments to the same. So let's look at some other sort of stuff. Net art contests the museum as a privileged site of authentic aesthetic experience. Now, there's a big difference between experiencing Yodi's OSS on a computer at a museum than experiencing it on my own computer, where this self-landing, downloading applications could infect my machine, destroy my shared spaces presentation, and then where would we be at? It hits us at home with our emotional connections to our own private information space. Andy Deck's Graffiti, kind of a visualization of Ascot's distributed authorship, where individuals, and I'm sorry you can't see the videos here, they're not playing, but this is a work where people from all around the world are contributing little blocks to a larger evolving composition that's constantly changing. It questions notions of authorship, and Deck is really questioning intellectual property. He says, copy it, steal it, share it, print it, pretend it's yours, I don't care. Similarly, Scott Dray's Electric Sheep project is an open-source peer-to-peer screensaver that draws on the computing power of multiple machines distributed around the world in order to generate the processing power to render complex animated fractals. So how are artists using mobile devices and social media as an integral part of their work? How are audiences using the same as an integral part of their experience of art and art museums? How are these emergent artistic and social practices bringing culture to and out of people and engaging them as participants in aesthetic exchanges? What are the stakes of this effective digital economy, and what is the role of the museum in this complex interplay of flows? Let's look at some artworks that demand, invite, and suggest device use. In the Khan's screens exposing employed narratives, they ask the question, what is the fruit of your labor? To 3 different sort of pools of laborers in Silicon Valley. You could not see their textual responses with the naked eye because they were transmitted using IR, infrared. You had to use an electric device in order to see it, like a phone or camera. Now, it's not just limited to device art. It could be oil on linen, like Andrew Sender's piece with this long imaginative title, in which the artist paints, using the vernacular of digital technology, a sort of pixelated image, which is very difficult to see. But if you hold up your camera to it or take a photograph of it, as I did on the right, you see that a portrait emerges out of it. So this seems to implicitly suggest that we are always framing things, and that indeed some of these framings are necessary and important and provide tremendous insight and perception. Michael Reese, in his exhibition, his piece now that's up on Broadway, just below Columbus Circle, this is a large three-dimensional sculpture generated from a frozen frame from this animation you see in the bottom. Well, he couldn't show the animation along with the sculpture as he did in Kansas City some years back, but he created a QR code, and you can scan the QR code with your reader and see the animation while you're looking at the sculpture. Mark Shepard's Tactical Sound Garden is an open-source software platform for cultivating and visiting virtual public sound gardens. You can plant a sound, you can prune a sound, you can experience and participate in the production and the reception of this virtual sound garden. And I was really proud to be able to premiere this piece, Effexity Passages and Tunnels, at the Renewed Digital Arts Festival in Copenhagen this fall. This is really a remarkable piece in which the artists are trying to expose somatic and effective layers of urban spaces through dance improvisation and screen dance. So you use a software program which, unlike Layer, permits the viewing of video and sound. And in the premiere, the dancer you see appearing in addition to the pre-recorded dance of her moving in that physical space. So you have the layering of the virtual and the actual, the space, as well as historic archival footage. So a layering of histories, layers of spacing, layers of different imagery. And it became a very social environment where people were sharing their screens. We had to illuminate the tags. And the tags, as you see, they're not QR tags. They're actual images. So you get rid of some of that ugly QR aesthetic. But I think that these sorts of works give us insight into possible futures that are unfolding. Crystal South curated an exhibition at the Portland Art Museum using QR codes. Artists were invited, including Brad Trammell, to submit a digital image that responded to a work in the museum's collection, and the audience was able to see the work in the collection along with the digital production using the QR codes. The Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam also did an AR exhibition when their gallery spaces were closed for renovation. Here at the Lowlands Festival, users could scan the QR codes from the cards and see masterpieces from the collection and sort of place them in different places and things. So museums are getting into this. I love this mock-up. This is not really something you'd see at MoMA. No augmented reality beyond this point, please. This was done by Sander Feenhoff in connection with the uninvited DIY. It's called We Are in MoMA in 2010 that I'm sure many of you have seen. So actually MoMA was aware of this and they publicized it, and I think that Will's going to talk more about this because he was actually involved in it. So I won't go into much more detail. But I think this layering of things is really very interesting. And it's not just layering because the artist created the 7th floor, which doesn't really exist at MoMA. Mark Skwarek also did the Whitney Biennial AR intervention. So if you don't get into the Whitney Biennial, you can just do your AR intervention and actually be part of it. I won't talk much about Brad's work because he's here to talk about it, but I'm really interested in how social media can be used as a tool for investigating the transit of images between art and non-art contexts and the relationship between virtual and actual objects. So we see here on the left Livestrong, which is hot dogs with ear cleaners and a pen with a Lance Armstrong band, shown on the jogging Tumblr. It received over 2,000 comments. Now that's a lot of people looking at and commenting on an image. Now he also has this for sale on his Etsy store. And you can buy this for only $40. But between you and me, I don't want to deal with that when it comes to my mailbox. So the temporality, the emphasis is really placed not on the object, but on the image and the circulation of images. Also, the Doritos Locos Master Lock Shut, which appears in the Etsy store, was modeled in this Disc Magazine shoot. Parker Ito writes, I got this idea to create artworks that were undocumentable in the sense of a single image, like the one we saw on a show of Robert Irwin's. This is the only image you may see of my work. So the content of the work was the documentation, and that had multiple unique viewing experiences. You can see how this same block of objects in this sort of studio setting looks like this, but then in a more informal photograph completely changes, and if the flash is really bright, it's completely washed out. So this work demands forms of interaction characteristic of social media. The object serves as a prop that literally reacts to the contemporary impulse to photograph and share one's images of artworks. The primacy of the object is supplanted by the primacy of social practices, producing as many varied images as possible, distributed as widely as possible through as many social networks as possible, generating as many likes as possible. And actually, Parker, between you and me, is kind of a like whore, but that's part of his whole shtick. So we could say, following Walter Benjamin, who wrote in 1936, to an ever-increasing degree, the work reproduced becomes the reproduction of a work designed for reproducibility. Today, to an ever-increasing degree, the work reproduced becomes the reproduction and instantaneous dissemination and recirculation of a work designed for social media. Artie Verkant sort of reinforces this, saying the documentation becomes a separate work in itself. And in terms of those images and the control of images, art has long been dominated by individuals and institutions who want to control the distribution of images. This is detrimental to the overall cultural life of the object and solidify art as a hermetic system. He's much more interested in active and immediate visual dialogue. So, Museums recognize that there's an undeniable benefit to having visitors tweet about their visit or share photos, as Brooke Fruitman of MoMA says. And I seem to be running out of time, but I did want to mention that this is the MoMA Flickr site, which has over 2,000 members and nearly 7,000 images. The Whitney, which has a no-photo policy, has 156 members and 297 images. And people have actually skipped going to the Whitney because they can't photograph it. So other people say, we're fighting an uphill battle if you restrict. Why not support it in an open way that's constructive and embraces the public? So there are many reasons why not to. We've all experienced, as Donna's photograph showed, people with their cameras every which way trying to photograph the images. If I can just skip ahead, and that's been lampooned by Yodi in their work. I think that another speaker is going to talk about selfies. So just to close up, the exhibition no longer focuses on the artifact, but on the performance of the curatorial narrative about it. Multimedia are not used to support certain objects and offer additional explanations. On the contrary, the objects are the ones to exemplify and support the narrative. But in 1998, Abercrombie and Longhurst said that viewers or readers are located in a view of media and everyday life as interwoven, where spectacle and performances are seen as virtually inseparable within increasingly media-saturated society and diffused audiences. So you can't take the internet out of art, much less take it out of the audience. The use of social media in museums holds potential to shift institutional emphasis from bringing culture to people, curatorial performance of narrative, to bringing culture out of them. It dovetails with artists' explorations of the fluidity of objects and images, public and private domains, the art and fine art and popular culture, actual, virtual, augmented space, production, consumption, prosumption, and participation. It corresponds with many visitors' desires to create their own narratives by performing for and projecting themselves into their virtual communities as a ritualized form of cultural spectacle. So I'll just leave you with these questions. What's the role of museums to play in this? What roles do they want to play? Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, and I would like to invite the speaker.